On April 5, 1970, in Newhall, California, 4 California highway patrolmen were gunned down shortly before midnight by 2 armed suspects in the parking lot of Jay's Restaurant while in the process of making a traffic stop on a vehicle wanted for brandishing a firearm at a passing motorist.
In the quiet hours of April 5, 1970, a routine traffic stop on a California highway would soon erupt into one of the deadliest shootouts in American law enforcement history. 4 brave officers, unaware of the danger that lay ahead, confronted 2 ruthless criminals in the town of Newhall. What began as a simple stop for erratic driving would quickly spiral into a brutal gunfight, leaving the streets stained with blood and forever changing how police officers are trained and armed. This is the story of the Newhall Incident, a tragic event that shook the nation and reshaped law enforcement across the country. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the United States was experiencing a significant surge in violent crime, particularly in California. This period was marked by increasing confrontations between law enforcement and dangerous criminals. One of the most notorious and tragic incidents from this time was the Newhall Incident, which unfolded on April 5, 1970, and forever changed police training across the country. The 2 key figures in this event, Bobby Davis and Jack Twinning, were hardened ex-convicts and career criminals with a violent past. Their actions on that fateful night led to one of the deadliest shootouts involving law enforcement in California's history. Davis and Twinning had a long history of crime. Both men had been in and out of prison and were known for their cruelty. On the night of April 5th, they were armed and dangerous, having stolen a vehicle with plans to continue their criminal rampage. At around 11:55 p.m., while driving on Interstate 5 near Newhall, California, they began to attract the attention of 2 California Highway Patrol CHP officers. The officers, James Pence and Roger Gore, noticed Davis and Twinning's vehicle driving erratically, which prompted them to initiate a routine traffic stop. What began as a seemingly straightforward stop quickly spiraled into chaos. Unknown to the officers, they dealt with 2 men willing to do anything to avoid returning to prison. Pence and Gore had no reason to suspect that this stop would be any different. As they pulled their patrol car behind the swerving Pontiac and activated their flashing lights, they were completely unaware that the 2 men inside the car were Bobby Davis and Jack Twinning, 2 hardened criminals with a violent past and a deadly future. As the officers approached the vehicle, neither Davis nor Twinning made any suspicious movements. They sat still in their seats with the car idling quietly by the side of the road. But what Pence and Gore couldn't see was the hidden danger. Both Davis and Twinning were armed to the teeth, ready to do anything to avoid going back to prison. To understand the tragic events of that night, it's essential to know who Bobby Davis and Jack Twinning were. Both men had lived lives filled with crime and violence, and both had long histories of run-ins with the law. They weren't just petty thieves or low-level criminals, they were dangerous men with nothing to lose. Bobby Davis, at the time of the Newhall Incident, was a career criminal with a history of armed robbery and assault. Having spent much of his adult life in and out of prison, Davis had grown hardened by his experiences behind bars. For him, getting caught that night would mean another long stretch in prison, and he wasn't willing to go back. Jack Twinning, Davis's partner, was cut from a similar cloth. He, too, had a history of violent crime, and like Davis, he had been in and out of the prison system for years. Twinning was known for his unpredictable temper and his willingness to resort to violence. Together, the 2 men made a dangerous duo, and on April 5th, they were desperate to avoid capture. The stolen Pontiac they were driving that night wasn't their first brush with the law. It was simply the latest in a string of criminal activities. As the headlights of the CHP cruiser reflected in their rearview mirror, Davis and Twinning exchanged a glance. They both knew that this was faster. As the officers approached the vehicle, they were met with an explosion of gunfire. Davis and Twinning had concealed weapons inside the car, and without warning they opened fire, catching the officers off guard. Within moments, a backup unit consisting of CHP officers, Walter Frago and George Allen, arrived at the scene. They, too, were ambushed as the gun battle intensified. The criminals, armed with high-powered firearms, showed no mercy. In just minutes, 4 CHP officers, Pence, Gore, Frago, and Allain, were fatally wounded. After the massacre, a massive manhunt was launched involving over 1,000 law enforcement officers. Authorities quickly identified Twinning and Davis as the suspects. Later that same day, Twinning took a civilian hostage at gunpoint and barricaded himself in a home. After several hours of negotiation, Twinning released the hostage but refused to surrender. Before law enforcement could breach the home, Twinning committed suicide. Davis managed to escape the area but was captured the next day. He was arrested without incident at a gas station in Santa Clarita after being spotted by officers.
My first impression, it was a movie, but didn't take but a minute to realize this is real gunfire. He was kneeling and
trying to reload.
Yeah, and the assailant just, "I got you now, you dumb SOB," and
The violence of the attack was so brutal and shocking that it left law enforcement agencies across the nation stunned. The aftermath of the Newhall Incident was felt far and wide. The event highlighted the urgent need for better police training, tactics, and equipment. Before this tragedy, many police officers received minimal firearms training and were ill-prepared for high-intensity confrontations with heavily armed criminals. Bobby Davis was tried and convicted for the murder of the 4 CHP officers. He received the death penalty, though his sentence was later commuted to life in prison when the death penalty was briefly abolished in California in the 1970s. The Newhall Incident profoundly affected law enforcement procedures across the United States. It exposed serious shortcomings in police training, tactics, and equipment, especially in handling armed confrontations. Before the incident, many officers were not adequately trained in dealing with such high-risk situations, particularly in firearm use, reloading under pressure, and taking cover during gunfights.